"My dearest father," said Elizabeth, "you cannot deceive me. I penetrate your motives, but you wholly mistake. You would force me also to mistake your character, but I know you too well. You never form transitory friendships. You take no pleasure in the ordinary run of human intercourse. You inquire, you seek for instruction, you endeavor to confer benefits, but you have no happiness except such as you derive from your heart, and that is not easily impressed. Did you not for many long years continue faithful to one idea, adhere to one image, devote yourself to one only, despite all that separated you? Did not the impediment you found to the fulfillment of your visions blight your whole life and bring you here? Pardon me if I allude to these things. I cannot be to you what she was, but you can no more banish me from your heart and imagination than you could her. I know that you cannot. We are not parent and child," she continued playfully, "but we have a strong resemblance on one point. Fidelity is our characteristic. We will not speak of this to others. They might think that we boasted. I'm not quite sure that it is not a defect, at least in some cases, as with you it proved a misfortune. To me it can never be such. It repays itself. I cannot leave you, whatever befalls. If Gerard Neville is hereafter lost to me, I cannot help it. It would kill me to fall off from you. I must follow the natural, the irresistible bent of my character. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we will speak more of this. What is necessary for your happiness, be assured, I will fulfill without repining. But now, dearest father, let us not speak of the future now. My heart is too full of the present. The future appears to me a dream never to be arrived at. Oh, how more than blessed I shall be when the future, the long future, shall grow into interest and importance." They were interrupted. One person came in, and then another, and the appalling details of the morrow effectually banished all thoughts of plans, the necessity of which Falkner wished to impress on his young companion. He also was obliged to give himself up to present cares. He received all, he talked to all, with a serious but unembarrassed air, while Elizabeth sat shuddering by, wiping away her tears unseen, and turning her dimmed eyes from one to the other, pale and miserable. We have fortitude and resignation for ourselves, but when those beloved are in peril we can only weep and pray. Sheltered in a dusky corner, a little retreated behind Falkner, she watched, she listened to all, and her heart almost broke. Leave him, after this leave him, she thought, a prey to such memories. Oh, may all good angels desert me when I become so vile a wretch. The hour came when they must part. She was not to see him on the morrow, until the trial was over, for her presence during the preliminary scenes was neither fitting nor practicable. Already great indulgences had been granted to the prisoner, arising from his peculiar position, the great length of time since the supposed crime had been committed, and the impression, now become general, that he was innocent. But this had limits. The morrow was to decide all, and send him forth free and guiltless, or doom him to all the horrors of condemnation and final suffering. Their parting was solemn, neither indulged in grief. Falkner felt composed. Elizabeth endeavored to assume tranquility, but her lips quivered, and she could not speak. It was like separating not to meet for years, a few short hours, and she would look again upon his face. But how much would happen in the interval? How mighty a change have occurred? What agony would both have gone through? The one picturing, the other enduring the scene of the morrow. The gaze of thousands, the accusation, the evidence, the defense, the verdict, each of these bearing with it to the well-born and refined a barbed dart, pregnant with thrilling poison, ignominy added to danger. How Elizabeth longed to express to the assembled world the honor in which she held him, whom all looked on as overwhelmed with disgrace. How she yearned to declare the glory she took in the ties that bound them and the affection that she bore. She must be mute, but she felt all this to bursting, and her last words, best of men, excellent, upright, noble, generous, God will preserve you and restore you to me, expressed in some degree the swelling emotions of her soul. They parted. Night and silence gathered round Falkner's pillow. With stoical firmness he banished retrospect, he banished care. He laid his hopes and fears at the feet of that almighty power, who holds earth and all it contains in the hollow of his hand, and he would trouble himself no more concerning the inevitable, though unknown decree. His thoughts were at first solemn and calm, and then, as the human mind can never, even in torture, fix itself unalterably on one point, milder and more pleasing reveries presented themselves. He thought of himself as a wild yet not worthless schoolboy, He remembered the cottage porch clustered over with odoriferous parasites, under whose shadow sat the sick, pale lady with her starry eyes and wise lessons, and her radiant daughter, whose soft hand he held as they both nestled close at her feet. He recalled his wanderings with that daughter over hill and dale, when their steps were light, and their hearts, unburdened with a care, soared to that heaven which her blessed spirit had already reached. Oh, what is life, that these dreams of youth and innocence should have conducted her to an untimely grave, him to a felon's cell. The thought came with a sharp pang. Again he banished it, and the land of Greece, his perils, and his wanderings with Elizabeth on the shores of Zante now replaced his other memories. He then bore a burden on his heart, which veiled with dark crape the glories of a sunny climate, the heart-cheering tenderness of his adopted child. This was less bitter, this meeting of fate, this atonement. Sleep crept over him at last, and such is the force of innocence, that though a cloud of agony hung over his awakening, yet he slept peacefully on the eve of his trial. Towards morning his sleep became less tranquil. He moved, he groaned, then, opening his eyes, he started up, struggling to attain full consciousness of where he was and wherefore. He had been dreaming, and he asked himself what had been the subject of his dreams. Was it Greece, or the dreary waste shores of Cumberland? And why did that fair lingering shape beckon him? Was it Alytha or Elizabeth? Before these confused doubts could be solved, he recognized the walls of the cell and saw the shadow of the bars of his windows on the curtain spread before it. It was morning, the morning, where would another sun find him? He rose and drew aside the curtain, and there were the dark, high walls, weather-stained and huge. Clear but sunless daylight was spread over each object. It penetrated every nook, and yet was devoid of cheer. There is indeed something inexpressibly desolate in the sight of the early, grey, chill dawn dissipating the shadows of night, when the day which it harbingers is to bring misery. Night is a cloak, a shelter, a defense. All men sleep at night, the law sleeps, and its dread ministrants are harmless in their beds, hushed like cradled children. Even now they sleep, thought Falkner, pillowed and curtained in luxury, but day is come, and they will soon resume their offices and drag me before them, and wherefore? Because it is day, because it is Wednesday, because names have been given to portions of time, which otherwise might be passed over and forgot. To the surgeon's eye, a human body sometimes presents itself merely as a mass of bones, muscles, and arteries, though that human body may contain a soul to emulate Shakespeare, and thus there are moments when the wretched dissect the forms of life, and contemplating only the outward semblance of events, wonder how so much power of misery, or the reverse, resides in what is after all but sleeping or waking, walking here or walking there, seeing one fellow creature instead of another. Such were the morbid sensations that absorbed Falkner as day grew clearer and clearer, the narrow court more gloomy as compared with the sky, and the objects in his cell assumed their natural color and appearances. All asleep, he again thought, except I, the sufferer, and does my own Elizabeth sleep? Heaven grant it, and guard her slumbers. May those dear eyes long remain closed in peace upon this miserable day. He dressed himself long before anyone in the prison, and jailers are early risers, was awake. At last there were steps in the passage, bolts were drawn and voices heard. These familiar sounds recalled him to actual life and approaching, inevitable events. His haughty soul awoke again, a dogged pride steeled his heart. He remembered the accusation, the execration in which he believed himself to be held, and his innocence. Retribution or atonement, I am ready to pay it as it is demanded of me for Alytha's sake, but the injustice of man is not lessened on this account. Henceforth I am to be stamped with ignominy, and yet in what am I worse than my fellows? At least they shall not see that my spirit bends before them. He assumed cheerfulness, and bore all the preliminaries of preparation with apparent carelessness. Sometimes his eagle eye flashed fire, sometimes fixed on vacancy. A whole life of memories passed across his mental vision. But there was no haste, no trepidation, no faltering. He never thought of danger or of death. Innocence sustained him. The ignominy of the present was all that he felt that he had to endure and master, that, and the desolation beyond, when branded through life, as he believed he should be, even by acquittal, he was henceforth to be looked on as an outcast. At length he was led forth to trial, pride in his heart, resolution in his eye. He passed out of the gloomy portal of the prison and entered the sunlit street. Houses were around. but through an opening he caught a glimpse of the country, uplands and lawny fields and tree-crested hills, the work of God himself. Sunshine rested on the scene. One used to liberty had regarded with contempt the restricted view presented by the opening. But to the prisoner, who for months had only seen his prison walls, it seemed as if the creation lay unrolled in its majesty before him. What was man in comparison with the power that upheld the earth and bade the sun to shine? And man was to judge him? What mockery! Man and all his works were but a plaything in the hands of omnipotence, and to that Falkner submitted his destiny. He rose above the degrading circumstances around him. He looked down upon his fate. A lofty calm at last possessed his soul. He felt that naught said or done that day by his fellow creatures could move him. His reliance was elsewhere. It rested on his own innocence, and his intimate sense that he was in no more danger now than if sheltered in the farthest, darkest retreat, unknown to man. He walked as if surrounded by an atmosphere which no storms from without could penetrate. He entered the court with a serene brow, and so much dignity added to a look that expressed such entire peace of conscience that everyone who beheld him became prepossessed in his favor. His distinct, calm voice declaring himself not guilty, the confidence, untinged by vaunting, with which he uttered the customary appeal to God and his country, excited admiration at first, and then, when a second sentiment could be felt, the most heart-moving pity. Such a man, so unstained by vice, so raised above crime, had never stood there before. Accustomed to the sight of vulgar rogues or hardened ruffians, wonder was mingled with a certain self-examination, which made each man feel that, if justice were done, he probably deserved more to be in that dock than the prisoner. And then they remembered that he stood there to be consigned to life or death, as the jury should decide. A breathless interest was awakened, not only in the spectators, but even in those hardened by habit to scenes like this. Every customary act of the court was accompanied by a solemnity unfelt before. The feeling, indeed, that reigned was something more than solemn. Thirsting curiosity and eager wonder gave way before thrilling awe to think that man might be condemned to an ignominious end. When once the trial had begun and his preliminary part had been played, Falkner sat down. He became, to all appearance, abstracted. He was, indeed, thinking of things more painful than even the present scene. The screams and struggles of the agonized Elizabeth, her last sad sleep in the hut upon the shore, the strangling, turbid waves, her wet, lifeless form, her low, unnamed grave dug by him. Had these been atoned for by long years of remorse and misery, or was the present ignominy, and worse that might ensue, fitting punishment? Be it as it might, he was equal to the severest blows, and ready to lay down a life in compensation for that of which he, most unintentionally, and yet most cruelly, had deprived her. His thoughts were not recalled to the present scene till a voice struck his ear, so like hers did the dead speak. Knit up as he was to the endurance of all, he trembled from head to foot. He had been so far away from that place, till the echo, as it were, of Elizabeth's voice recalled him. In a moment he recovered himself, and found that it was her child, Gerard Neville, who was giving his evidence. He heard the son of his victim speak of him as innocent, and a thrill of thankfulness entered his soul. He smiled, and hope and sympathy with his fellow creatures, and natural softening feelings, replaced the gloomy bitterness and harshness of his past reflections. He felt that he should be acquitted, and that it became him to impress all present favorably. It became him to conduct himself so as to show his confidence in the justice of those on whom his fate depended, and at once to assert the dignity of innocence. From that time he gave himself entirely up to the details of the trial. He became attentive, and not the less calm and resolute, because he believed that his own exertions would crown the hour with success. The spectators saw the change in him and were roused to double interest. The court clock, meanwhile, kept measure of the time that passed. The hands traveled silently on another turn, and all would be over, and what would then be? Chapter 49. Elizabeth, meanwhile, might envy the resolution that bore him through these appalling scenes. On the night after leaving him, she had not even attempted to rest. Wrapped in a shawl, she threw herself on a sofa and told each hour during the livelong night. Her reveries were wild, vague, and exquisitely painful. In the morning she tried to recall her faculties. She remembered her conviction that on that day Falkner would be liberated, and she dressed herself with care, that she might welcome him with the appearances of rejoicing. She expected with unconquerable trepidation the hour when the court would meet. Before that hour, there was a knock at her door, and a visitor was announced. It was Mrs. Raby. It was indeed a solace to see a friendly face of her own sex. She had been so long deprived of this natural support. Lady Cecil had now and then written to her. Her letters were always affectionate, but she seemed stunned by the magnitude of the blow that had fallen on her friend and unable to proffer consolation. With kindness of heart, sweetness of temper, and much good sense, still Lady Cecil was commonplace and worldly. Mrs. Raby was of a higher order of being. She saw things too exclusively through one medium, and thus the scope of her exertions was narrowed, but that medium was a pure and elevated one. In visiting Elizabeth, on this occasion, she soared beyond it. Long and heavily had her desertion of the generous girl weighed on her conscience. She could sympathize in her heroism and warmly approve. It was in her nature to praise and to reward merit, and she had withheld all tribute from her abandoned niece. The interests of her religion, blended with those of family, actuated her, and while resisting a natural impulse of generosity, she fancied that she was doing right. She had spoken concerning her with no one but Lady Cecil, and she, while she praised her young friend, forgot to speak of Falkner, and there lay the stumbling block to every motion in her favor. When Elizabeth repaired to Carlisle, Mrs. Raby returned to Belleforest. She scarcely knew how to introduce the subject to her father-in-law, and when she did, he, verging into dotage, only said, "Act as you please, my dear, I rely on you. Act for the honor and welfare of yourself and your children." The old man day by day lost his powers of memory and reason. By the time of the trial, he had become a mere cipher. Every responsibility fell on Mrs. Raby, and she, eager to do right and fearful to do wrong, struggled with her better nature, wavered, repented, and yet remained inactive. Neville strongly reprobated the conduct of everyone towards Elizabeth. He had never seen Mrs. Raby, but she in particular he regarded with the strongest disapprobation. It so happened that the very day after his father's death, he was at Lady Cecil's when Mrs. Raby called, and by an exception in the general orders made for Elizabeth's sake, she was let come up. Gerard was alone in the drawing-room when she was announced. He rose hastily, meaning to withdraw, when the lady's appearance changed his entire mind. We ridicule the minutiae of the science of physiognomy, but who is not open to first impressions? Neville was prepossessed favorably by Mrs. Raby's countenance, her open, thoughtful brow, her large, dark, melancholy eyes, her dignity of manner, joined to evident marks of strong feeling, at once showed him that he saw a woman capable of generous sentiments and heroic sacrifice. He felt that there must have been some grievous error in Sophia's proceedings not to have awakened more active interest in her mind. While he was forming these conclusions, Mrs. Raby was struck by him in an equally favorable manner. No one could see Gerard Neville without feeling that something angelic, something nobly disinterested, unearthly in its purity, yet, beyond the usual nature of man, sympathetic, animated a countenance that was all sensibility, genius, and love. In a minute they were intimate friends. Lady Cecil, hearing that they were together, would not interrupt them, and their conversation was long. Neville related his first acquaintance with Elizabeth Raby. He sketched the history of Falkner, he described him, and the scene when he denounced himself as the destroyer of Alytha. He declared his conviction of his innocence. He narrated Sir Boyvill's dying words. Then they both dwelt on his long imprisonment, Elizabeth's faithful affection, and all that they must have undergone, enough to move the stoniest heart. Tears rushed into Gerard's eyes while he spoke, while he described her innocence, her integrity, her total forgetfulness of self. "And I have deserted her," exclaimed Mrs. Raby. "We have all deserted her. This must not continue. You go to Carlisle tomorrow for the trial. The moment it is over and Mr. Falkner acquitted, when they have left that town, where all is so full of their name and story, I will see her and try to make up for my past neglect." "It will be too late," said Gerard. "You may then please yourself by admiring one so superior to every human being, but you will not benefit her. Falkner acquitted, she will have risen above all need of your support. Now is the hour to be of use. The very hour of the trial, when this unfortunate, heroic girl is thrown entirely on herself, wounded by her absolute friendlessness, yet disdaining to complain. I could almost wish that Sophia would disregard appearances and hasten to her side, although her connection with our family would render that too strange. But you, Mrs. Raby, what should stop you? She is your niece. How vain to attempt to conceal this from the world. It must be known, through me, I fondly trust, it will be known, who shall claim her as Miss Raby, when as Elizabeth Falkner I could never see her more. And when it is known, will not your desertion be censured? Be wise, be generous, win that noblest and gentlest heart by your kindness now, and the very act will be your reward. Hasten to Carlisle, be with her in the saddest hour that ever one so young and innocent passed through. Mrs. Raby was moved, she was persuaded. She felt a veil fall from before her eyes. She saw her duty, and she keenly felt the littleness of her past desertion. She did not hesitate, and now that she perceived how gladly her niece welcomed her in this hour of affliction, and how gratefully she appreciated her kindness, she found in the approval of her own heart the sweetest recompense for her disinterestedness. Elizabeth's swollen eyes and timid, hurried manner betrayed how she had passed the night, and how she was possessed by the most agitating fears. Still she spoke of the acquittal of her father, as she took pride in calling him at this crisis as certain, and Mrs. Raby, taking advantage of this, endeavored to draw her mind from the torture of representing to herself the progress of the scene, then acting at so short a distance from them, by speaking of the future. Elizabeth mentioned Falkner's determination to quit England and her own to accompany him. The hinted dissuasion of Mrs. Raby she disregarded. He has been a father to me, I am his child. What would you say to a daughter who deserted her father in adversity and sickness? And dear Mrs. Raby, you must remember that my father is, in spite of all his courage, struck by disease. Accustomed to my attentions, he would die if left to hirelings. Deserted by me, he would sink into apathy or despair. Mrs. Raby listened. She admired the enthusiasm, and yet the softness, the sensibility and firmness of her young kinswoman. But she was pained. Many ideas assailed her, but she would not entertain them. They were too wild and dangerous, and yet her heart, formed for generosity, was tempted to trample upon the suggestions of prudence and the qualms of bigotry. To give diversion to her thoughts, she mentioned Gerard Neville. A blush of pleasure, a smile shone more in the eyes than on the lips, mantled over her niece's countenance. She spoke of him as of a being scarcely earthly in his excellence. His devotion to his mother first, and lately his generosity towards her, his resolution to go to America, to seek Osborne for her sake and the sake of justice, were themes for eloquence. She spoke with warmth and truth. Yet, if you follow Mr. Falkner's fortunes, said Mrs. Raby, you will see him no more. I cannot believe that, replied Elizabeth. Yet, if it must be so, I am resigned. He will never forget me, and I shall feel that I am worthy of him, though separated. Better that, than to remain at the sacrifice of all I hold honorable and good. He would despise me, and that were worse absence, an absence of the heart 10,000 times more galling than mere distance of place. One would be eternal and irremediable, the other easily obviated when our duties should no longer clash. I go with my father because he is suffering. Neville may join us because he is innocent. He will not, I feel and know, either forget me or stay away forever. Chapter 50. While they were conversing, quick footsteps were heard in the street below. Mrs. Raby had succeeded in making the time pass more lightly than could be hoped. It was 3 o'clock. There was a knock at the door of the house. Elizabeth, breaking off abruptly, turned ashy pale and clasped her hands in the agony of expectation. Osborne rushed into the room. It is all over, he exclaimed. All is well. Tears streamed from his eyes as he spoke and ran up to shake hands with Elizabeth and congratulate her with an ardor and joy that contrasted strangely with the frightened-looking being he had always before shown himself. Mr. Falkner is acquitted. He is free. He will soon be here. No one could doubt his innocence that saw him. No one did doubt it. The jury did not even retire. Thus Osborne ran on, relating the events of the trial. Falkner's mere appearance had prepossessed every one. The frankness of his open brow, his dignified, unembarrassed manner, his voice, whose clear tones were the very echo of truth, vouched for him. The barrister who conducted the prosecution narrated the facts rather as a mystery to be inquired into than as a crime to be detected. Gerard Neville's testimony was entirely favorable to the prisoner. He showed how Falkner, wholly unsuspected, safe from the shadow of accusation, had spontaneously related the unhappy part he took in his unfortunate mother's death, for the sake of restoring her reputation and relieving the minds of her relatives. The narrative, written in Greece and left as explanation in case of his death, was further proof of the truth of his account. Gerard declared himself satisfied of his innocence, and when he stated his father's dying words, his desire, at the last hour on the bed of death, to record his belief in Falkner's being guiltless of the charge brought against him, words spoken as it were yesterday, for he who uttered them still lay unburied, the surprise seemed to be that he should have suffered a long imprisonment and the degradation of a trial. Osborne's own evidence was clear and satisfactory. At last Falkner himself was asked what defense he had to make. As he rose, every eye turned on him, every voice and breath were hushed. A solemn silence reigned. His words were few, spoken calmly and impressively. He rested his innocence on the very evidence brought against him. He had been the cause of the lady's death, and asked for no mercy, but for her sake, and the sake of that heroic feeling that led her to encounter death amid the waves, he asked for justice, and he did not for a moment doubt that it would be rendered him. Nor could you doubt it as you heard him, continued Osborne. Never were truth and innocence written so clearly on human countenance as on his as he looked upon the jury with his eagle eyes, addressing them without pride, but with infinite majesty, as if he could rule their souls through the power of a clear conscience and a just cause. They did not hesitate. The jury did not hesitate a moment. I rushed here the moment I heard the words, and now he is come. Many steps were again heard in the street below, and one, which Elizabeth could not mistake, upon the stairs. Falkner entered, she flew to his arms, and he pressed her to his bosom, wrapping her in a fond, long embrace, while neither uttered a word. A few moments of trembling, almost to agony, a few agitated tears, and the natural gladness of the hour assumed its genuine aspect. Falkner, commanding himself, could shake hands with Osborne and thank him, and Elizabeth presented him to Mrs. Raby. He at once comprehended the kindness of her visit, and acknowledged it with a heartfelt thankfulness that showed how much he had suffered while picturing Elizabeth's abandonment. Soon various other persons poured into the room, and it was necessary to pass through many congratulations, and to thank, and what was really painful, to listen to the outpouring talk of those persons who had been present at the trial. Yet at such a moment, the heart, warmed and open, acknowledges few distinctions. Among those whose evident joy in the result filled Elizabeth with gratitude, she and Falkner felt touched by none so much as the visit of a turnkey who was ashamed to show himself, yet who, hearing they were immediately to quit Carlisle, begged permission to see them once again. The poor fellow, who looked on Elizabeth as an angel and Falkner as a demigod, for not forgetting others in their adversity, they had discovered and assisted his necessities. The poor fellow seemed out of his mind. With joy, ecstasy was painted on his face. There was no mistaking the clear language of a full and grateful heart. At length the hurry and tumult subsided, all departed. Falkner and his beloved companion were left alone, and for a few short hours enjoyed a satisfaction so perfect that angels might have envied them. Falkner was humbled, it is true, and looked to the past with the same remorse, but in vain did he think that his pride ought to feel deeply wounded by the scene of that day. In vain did he tell himself that, after such a trial, the purity of his honor was tarnished. His heart told another tale. Its emphatic emotions banished every conventional or sophisticated regret. He was honestly though calmly glad, and acknowledged the homely feeling with the sincerity of a man who had never been nourished in false refinements or factitious woes. In the evening, when it was dusk, said Falkner, "Let us, love, take a walk." The words made Elizabeth both laugh and cry for joy. He put on his hat, and with her on his arm, they got quickly out of the town and strolled down a neighboring lane. The wind that waved the heads of the still leafless trees, the aspect of the starry sky, the widespread fields, were felt as blessings from heaven by the liberated prisoner. "They all seem," he said, "created purely for my enjoyment. How sweet is nature, how divine a thing is liberty. Oh my God, I dare not be so happy as I would. There is one thought to chill the genial glow, but for the image of lost, dead Alitha, I should enjoy a felicity too pure for frail humanity." As they returned into the town, a carriage with 4 posters passed them. Elizabeth recognized at once Gerard Neville within. A pang shot through her heart to remember that they did not share their feelings, but were separated, perhaps forever, at this very hour. On her return, worn out with fatigue and oppressed with this reflection, she bade good night to Falkner, and he, happy in the idea that the same roof would cover them, kissed and embraced her. On entering her room, she found a letter on her toilet, and smiles again dimpled her face. It was a letter from Neville. It contained a few words, a very few, of congratulation, reminding her that he must hurry back to town for the melancholy task of his father's funeral, and imploring that neither she nor Falkner would determine on any immediate step. "I cannot penetrate the cloud in which we are enveloped," he said, "but I know that I ought not, that I cannot lose you. A little time, a little reflection may show us how to accord our various duties with the great necessity of our not being separated. Be not rash, therefore, my own Elizabeth, nor let your friend be rash. Surely the worst is over, and we may be permitted at last to hate no more and to be happy." Elizabeth kissed the letter and placed it beneath her pillow. That night she slept sweetly and well. Early in the morning, Mrs. Raby called on them. The same prepossession which Gerard had felt in her favor as soon as he saw her had taken place in her on seeing Falkner. There is a sort of magnetism that draws like to like, and causes minds of fine and lofty tone to recognize each other when brought in contact. Mrs. Raby saw and acknowledged at once Falkner's superiority. Whatever his faults had been, they were winnowed away by adversity, and he was become at once the noblest and gentlest of human beings. Mrs. Raby had that touch of generosity in her own character that never permitted her to see merit without openly acknowledging and endeavoring to reward it. The first thought of the plan she now entertained she had cast away as impracticable, but it returned. The desire to give and to benefit, a natural growth in her heart, made her look on it with complacency. By degrees, she dismissed the objections that presented themselves and resolved to act upon it. "We complain," she thought, "of the barrenness of life and the tediousness and faults of our fellow creatures. And when Providence brings before us 2 selected from the world as endowed with every admirable quality, we allow 1,000 unworthy considerations, which assume the voice of prudence, to exile us. From them, where can I find a man like Falkner, full of honor, sensibility, and talent, where a girl like Elizabeth, who has proved herself to be the very type of virtuous fidelity? Such companions will teach my children, better than volumes of moral treatises, the existence and loveliness of human goodness." Mrs. Raby passed a sleepless night, revolving these thoughts. In the morning she called on her new friends, and then, with all the grace that was her peculiar charm, she invited them to accompany her to Belleforest, and to take up their residence there for the next few months. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with delight. Falkner at once accepted the invitation for her and declined it for himself. "You hear him, my dear aunt," cried Elizabeth, "but you will not accept his refusal, you will not permit this perversity." "You forget many things when you speak thus," said Falkner, "but Mrs. Raby remembers them all. I thank her for her kindness, but I am sure she will admit of the propriety of my declining her invitation." "You imagine, then," replied Mrs. Raby, "that I made it for form's sake, intending it should be refused. You mistake. I know what you mean, and all you would covertly suggest. Let us cast aside the ceremonies of mere acquaintanceship. Let us be friends, and speak with the openness natural to us. Do you consent to this?" "You are good, very good," said Falkner. "Accept this dear girl, who will deign to be my friend." "If I thought," replied Mrs. Raby, "that your heart was so narrowed by the disasters and injustice you have suffered, that you must hereafter shut yourself up with the remembrance of them, I should feel inclined to retract my offer, for friendship is a mutual feeling, and he who feels only for himself can be no one's friend. But this is not the case with you. You have a heart true to every touch of sympathy, as Elizabeth can testify, since you determined to live for her sake, when driven to die by the agony of your sufferings. Let us, then, at once dismiss notions which I must consider as unworthy of us. When we turn to the page of history and read of men visited by adversity, what do we say to those of their fellow creatures who fall off from them on account of their misfortunes? Do we not call them little-minded and visit them with our contempt? do not class me with such. I might pass you carelessly by if you had always been prosperous. It is your misfortunes that inspire me with friendship, that render me eager to cultivate an intimacy with one who has risen above the most frightful calamity that could befall a man, and shown himself at once repentant and courageous. You will understand what I mean without long explanation. We shall have time for that hereafter. I honor you. What my heart feels, my voice and actions will ever be ready to proclaim. For Elizabeth's sake, you must not permit the world to think that he who adopted and brought her up is unworthy of regard and esteem. Come with us to Belleforest. You must not refuse. I long to introduce my girls to their matchless cousin. I long to win her heart by my affection and kindness. And if you will permit me the enviable task, how proud and glad I shall be to repay a portion of what we owe you on her account, by endeavoring to compensate, by a few months of tranquility and friendship, for the misery you have undergone. Mrs. Raby spoke with sincerity and earnestness, and Elizabeth's eyes pleaded her cause yet more eloquently. Where you go, she said to Falkner, there also I shall be. I shall not repine however you decide, but we shall be very happy at Belleforest. It was real modesty, and no false pride, that actuated Falkner. He felt happy, yet when he looked outward he fancied that hereafter he must be shut out from society, a branded man. He intimately felt the injustice of this. He accepted it as a punishment for the past, but he did not the less proudly rise above it. It was a real pleasure to find one entertaining the generous sentiments which Mrs. Raby expressed, and capable of acting on them. He felt worthy of her regard, and acknowledged that none but conventional reasons placed any barrier to his accepting her kind offers. Why then should he reject them? He did not. Frankly, and with sincere thanks, he suffered himself to be overruled, and on the following day they were on their road to Belleforest. Chapter 51. It was one of those days which do sometimes occur in March, warm and balmy, and enlivening as spring always is. The birds were busy among the leafless boughs, and if the carriage stopped for a moment, the gushing song of the skylark attracted the eye to his blue ethereal bower. A joyous welcome was breathed by nature to every heart, and none answered it so fervently as Falkner. Sentiments of pleasure possessed all three travelers. Mrs. Raby experienced that exultation natural to all human beings when performing a generous action. Elizabeth felt that in going to Belleforest she drew nearer Neville, for there was no reason why he should not enter her grandfather's doors. But Falkner was happier than either. It was not the vulgar joy of having escaped danger. Partly it was gladness to see Elizabeth restored to her family, where only, as things were, she could find happiness, and yet not divided from him. Partly it arose from the relief he felt, as the burden of heavy, long-endured care was lifted from his soul. But there was something more, which was incomprehensible even to himself. His bosom's lord sat lightly on its throne. He no longer turned a saddened, reproachful eye on nature, nor any more banished soft emotions, nourishing remorse as a duty. He was reconciled to himself and the world. The very circumstances of his prison and his trial being over, took with them the more galling portion of his retrospections. Health again filled his veins. At the moment when he had first accused himself, Neville saw in him a man about to die. It was evident now that the seeds of disease were destroyed. His person grew erect, his eye clear and animated. Elizabeth had never, since they left Greece, seen him so free from suffering. During all her intercourse with him, she never remembered him so bland and cheerful in his mood. It was the reward of much suffering, the gift of heaven to one who had endured patiently, opening his heart to the affections instead of cherishing pride and despair. It was the natural result of a noble disposition, which could raise itself above even its own errors, throwing off former evil as alien to its nature, embracing good as its indefeasible right. They entered the majestic avenues and embowered glades of Belleforest, where cedar, larch, and pine diversified the bare woods with a show of foliage. The turf was covered with early flowers. The buds were green and bursting on the boughs. Falkner remembered his visit the preceding summer. How little had he then foreseen impending events, and how far from his heart had then been the peace that at present so unaccountably possessed it. Then the wide domain and stately mansion had appeared the abode of gloom and bigotry. Now it was changed to a happy valley where love and cheerfulness reigned. Mrs. Raby was welcomed by her children, two elegant girls of 15 and 16, and a spirited boy of 12. They adored their mother and saw in their new cousin an occasion for rejoicing. Their sparkling looks and gay voices dispelled the last remnant of melancholy from the venerable mansion. Old Oswey Raby himself, too much sunk in dotage to understand what was going on, yet smiled and looked glad on the merry faces about him. He could not exactly make out who Elizabeth was. He was sure that it was a relation, and he treated her with an obsequious respect, which, considering his former impertinent tone, was exceedingly amusing.